I thought my wife was cheating. The more I investigated, the worse it looked. I never thought I'd be the guy posting here. I've read hundreds of stories on this subreddit over the years. Every time someone wrote, "I think my wife is cheating," there would always be people in the comments saying they were paranoid or overreacting. I used to think I'd never miss the signs. Now I'm not so sure. My wife, Emma, and I have been married for 11 years. She is the kind of person everyone instantly likes. Kind. The woman who remembers birthdays without Facebook reminders. The woman who brings soup to sick neighbors and somehow knows exactly what gift everyone wants for Christmas. If you'd asked me 3 months ago whether I trusted her, I would have laughed at the question. But then things started getting strange. At first, it was her phone. She had never been protective of it before. We'd leave our phones lying around the house all the time. Then suddenly she started taking it everywhere. Bathroom, laundry room, even outside when taking the trash out. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and noticed she wasn't in bed. I found her sitting in the dark kitchen whispering into her phone. The second she saw me, she ended the call. I remember asking who it was. She smiled and said, "Nobody important. Nobody important." At 2 in the morning, that answer stayed with me. A few days later, I noticed money missing. Not huge amounts. A few $100s here, $500 there. Then almost $2,000 disappeared from our savings account. When I asked about it, she immediately had an explanation. Just handling some things. Some things. That was the entire explanation. I didn't push because I trusted her. Or at least I thought I did. Then came the trips. She started leaving the house on weekends with big excuses. Helping a friend. Running errands. Meeting someone from work. Nothing specific. Whenever I asked for details, she'd answer just enough to end the conversation. Never enough to actually explain anything. And every time she came home, she looked emotionally exhausted. Not guilty, not nervous, just drained. Like she'd been carrying something heavy. One afternoon, I walked into our home office unexpectedly. She slammed her laptop shut so fast that I actually jumped. I laughed and asked if she was planning a surprise birthday party. She didn't laugh back. She just said, "Please don't look." That was the exact moment something changed in my stomach. Because innocent people don't usually react like that. At least that's what I told myself. The next few weeks only made things worse. She started texting someone constantly, smiling at messages, leaving the room to answer calls, deleting notifications before I could see them. Every classic sign, every single one. I hated myself for noticing, but once you start looking, you can't stop. Then last Tuesday, everything escalated. I came home early from work. Emma wasn't there. Her car wasn't there. Nothing unusual, until I noticed a receipt on the kitchen counter. A receipt she had apparently forgotten to throw away. The purchase was from a restaurant downtown. A very expensive restaurant. The kind of place couples go for anniversaries. There were 2 meals, 2 drinks, and the receipt had been from that afternoon. While I was at work, my heart dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I stared at that piece of paper for almost 20 minutes. Trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation, but every explanation sounded more ridiculous than the last. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Just 3 words. "Running late tonight." That was it. No explanation. No details. Nothing. And for the first time in 11 years, I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened our phone bill, and I found one number. A number she had called more than 80 times in the past month. A number I had never seen before. A number that wasn't saved in her contacts. And when I searched it online, the result made my blood run cold, because it appeared to belong to a man, and according to his public profile photo, he looked like exactly the kind of guy a husband worries about. I spent almost an hour staring at that profile picture. I know how pathetic that sounds, but when you're convinced your marriage might be falling apart, your brain starts connecting dots whether they belong together or not. The guy looked to be in his early 50s. Well-dressed, confident smile, professional-looking headshot. The kind of picture that somehow made me dislike him immediately. His name was Daniel. That was all I knew. Daniel, the man my wife had called more than 80 times. I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe he was a client. Maybe he was helping with some project. But if that was true, why keep it secret? Why take calls in the middle of the night? Why hide her phone? Why lie about where she was going? None of it made sense. The next few days were torture. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Emma would smile at incoming texts, then lock her screen the second I entered the room. She started volunteering information before I even asked questions. And somehow that felt even more suspicious. Just running errands. Just helping someone. Just taking care of something. Always vague. always incomplete. One evening she received a call while we were eating dinner. The moment she saw the screen, her expression changed. Not happy, not excited, serious, concerned. She stood up immediately. I need to take this. Then she walked outside. I watched through the window. 20 minutes. 20 full minutes. Talking, listening, facing. At one point she looked like she might cry. When she finally came back inside, I asked who it was. She hesitated, just for a second, but I noticed. Then she smiled. A friend. Another answer that explained absolutely nothing. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying every strange thing from the last few months. Every late night call. Every unexplained expense. Every secret trip. Every nervous reaction. The story in my head was becoming impossible to ignore. Then something happened that pushed me over the edge. 3 days later, Emma told me she was spending Saturday with her sister. Simple enough. Except later that afternoon her sister posted pictures online. She was apparently 3 states away attending a conference, meaning Emma had lied. Completely. Not a misunderstanding, not confusion, a direct lie. I remember sitting in my car staring at those photos, feeling physically sick, because once the first confirmed lie appears, every other suspicious thing suddenly feels real. When Emma came home that night, she acted completely normal, asked about my day, talked about dinner, even curled up next to me on the couch like she always did. Meanwhile, I felt like I was sitting beside a stranger who could look me directly in the eyes while lying. Then came the bank notification, another withdrawal, $4,800. Though, I checked twice because I thought I was reading it wrong. Almost $5,000. Vanished. I confronted her immediately. Her face went pale. For a moment I thought I finally had her. Finally. Proof. Instead she looked down and quietly said, I'll explain someday. Someday. Not today. Not now. Someday. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What does that even mean? I asked. She looked like she wanted to say something, like the words were right there. But then she shook her head. I just need you to trust me. Trust. The one thing she was making impossible. The argument lasted hours. Neither of us yelled, which somehow made it worse. She just kept repeating that she couldn't explain. I kept asking why. Neither of us moved. Neither of us won. Eventually she went upstairs. I stayed in the living room. Around midnight I heard her phone vibrate. She had forgotten it downstairs. For the first time in our marriage, I pick it up. I know people will judge me. Honestly, I judge myself. But by that point I was desperate. The message preview was already visible on the lock screen. I only read a single sentence. One sentence, but it changed everything. The message came from a contact saved only as D, and it said, he can't know yet. We're too close now. I felt my stomach drop, because whatever benefit of the doubt I'd been holding onto vanished instantly. What exactly were they closed to? What couldn't I know? And why did it sound like I was the only person being kept in the dark? I barely slept that night. The next morning Emma left before sunrise. She thought I was still asleep, but I wasn't. And for the first time, I decided I was going to follow her. Because if she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I was going to find it myself. I never thought I'd follow my wife. Even typing "Matt feels wrong." For 11 years, Emma had been my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone else on the planet. But trust had become something I could no longer recognize. So when she quietly left the house before sunrise that Saturday morning, I waited 5 minutes and got in my car. My hands were shaking. Part of me hoped I'd lose her. Part of me hoped she'd simply go somewhere boring and prove I was being ridiculous. Instead, she drove 40 minutes across town, then another 20 minutes into an area I'd never seen her visit before. Eventually, she pulled into the parking lot of a small office building. Nothing fancy, just a plain brick building with several businesses inside. I parked across the street. Emma got out, and a man walked toward her. Not Daniel, someone else. Tall, broad shoulders, gray hair, maybe 60 years old. The first thing that hit me was how comfortable they seemed around each other. Not romantic, but familiar. Too familiar. They hugged, then walked inside together. I sat there for almost an hour, every terrible possibility running through my head. Eventually they emerged, and they weren't alone. 2 more men joined them. Now there were 4 of them. Emma and 3 men, talking, laughing, looking at papers. At one point one of the men put his arm around her shoulders while showing her something. My chest tightened. I wanted to march over there. The man answers. Instead I stayed in my car like a coward, because some part of me was terrified of what I'd learn. The group eventually split up. Emma drove away. The men stayed behind. I considered following her. Instead I followed one of them. I know how insane that sounds. Looking back, I barely recognized myself during this period. The man drove to a storage facility, one of those places with dozens of rental units. He unlocked a unit and disappeared inside. 20 minutes later he left. I waited, then drove closer. The unit door was closed. I couldn't see anything, but I noticed something strange. There were fresh tire tracks, construction materials stacked nearby, and a sign-in sheet clipped to the office window. Several names were listed. One of them was Daniel, the same Daniel, the man from the phone records. At that point I was completely convinced. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew Emma was involved with something she desperately wanted hidden, and somehow multiple men were part of it. That evening she acted completely normal again. Meanwhile, I felt like I was losing my mind. Then something happened that made things even worse. 2 nights later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was male. "Oh there. Is this Michael?" My heart immediately started racing. "Who's asking?" A pause. Then, "Sorry, wrong number." The call ended. That should have been the end of it. Except 10 minutes later I checked our phone records. The same number had called Emma dozens of times. Dozens. And now they were calling me. By accident. Or maybe not by accident. I couldn't tell anymore. The next morning Emma left her laptop open while taking a shower. I stared at it from across the room for almost 5 minutes, telling myself not to look, not to become that person. Then I became that person. The screen was already unlocked. An email inbox was open. I scanned it quickly. Most of it made no sense. Invoices, receipts, travel confirmations, meeting schedules, names I didn't recognize. But one email froze me in place. The subject line read, "Final stage approval," and underneath was a sentence that made my blood run cold. After all these years, he's finally going to get what he deserves. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I immediately closed the laptop, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Because there are 2 ways to read a sentence like that. One sounds wonderful, the other sounds terrifying. And by then, my mind was choosing the worst possible interpretation every single time. But what happened later that week completely destroyed whatever hope I had left. Because I discovered Emma had been meeting someone else. Not Daniel, not any of the men I'd already seen. Someone new, someone she had apparently been searching for over a year. And when I learned who that person was, nothing made sense anymore. By this point, I was living 2 separate lives. The first was the life Emma saw, the husband who still smiled, still asked about her day, still sat beside her on the couch and watched TV at night. The second life was the one inside my head, the one filled with suspicion, anxiety, and 1,000 unanswered questions. I hated that version of myself, but I couldn't seem to stop. The discovery happened completely by accident, or maybe fate just decided I hadn't suffered enough. A week after I found the email, I was sorting through old paperwork in our filing cabinet. I wasn't looking for anything related to Emma. I was trying to find tax documents. Instead, I found a folder I'd never seen before. Nothing unusual about that. We've accumulated years of paperwork, but what caught my attention was the label. A name. Just a name. Sarah Whitmore. I had no idea who Sarah Whitmore was. The folder contained printed emails, travel records, public records searches, notes written in Emma's handwriting, pages and pages of them. My stomach immediately tightened. Why would my wife spend over a year researching another woman? The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. Addresses, phone numbers, employment records, social media screenshots, even notes about family members. It looked less like research and more like an investigation, a private investigation, and Emma had apparently been conducting it for months, maybe longer. Then I found something that genuinely scared me. A handwritten note, 1 sentence, underlined twice. "Don't tell Michael until we're certain." My name, written right there. I remember staring at it, my hands trembling, because suddenly, I wasn't just being excluded, I was the subject. Whatever was happening involved me directly, and everyone seemed determined to keep me in the dark. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it, then spent the rest of the day trying to act normal. That night, Emma got another phone call. As usual, she stepped outside. As usual, she lowered her voice. But this time I followed quietly enough to hear part of the conversation. Not much, just fragments. A few words, but those words haunted me. "He still doesn't know after everything he lost. We're almost there." Then she noticed me. The conversation ended immediately. She slipped her phone into her pocket. For a moment we simply stared at each other. I almost confronted her right then. Almost. But something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe pride, maybe the realization that I wasn't ready for the answer. The next few days became unbearable. Every clue seemed to point in a different direction. An unknown woman, multiple men, thousands of dollars, secret meetings, hidden research, and somehow all of it revolved around me. Then came another discovery. This one hurt more than anything before it. I received an alert from our credit monitoring service. One of our old debts had been paid off completely. The balance was zero. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Then I checked again. No mistake. The debt was gone. Now, here's why that mattered. Years earlier, I'd made some terrible financial decisions. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to haunt me. One particular debt had followed us for years. Emma knew how much it bothered me, how embarrassed I felt about it, and now it had vanished. Without my knowledge, without my approval, without any explanation. When I confronted her, she looked genuinely upset. Not angry, not defensive. Like I'd caught her doing something she desperately wanted to keep hidden. Why would you do that? I asked. You worked hard for that money. She looked away, then quietly said, some things are more important than money. I didn't know what to say, because that answer somehow made me feel worse, not better. The following weekend things escalated again. I watched Emma leave our house carrying a large envelope. She drove nearly 2 hours away. I followed. Eventually, she arrived at a small town I'd never visited. She parked near a diner. Then she walked inside. A few minutes later, another woman entered. Older, maybe late 60s. Emma immediately hugged her, and not the kind of hug you give a stranger. This looked emotional, personal, important. The two women sat together for almost 3 hours, talking, crying, looking through photographs. At one point, the older woman took Emma's hands and started sobbing. Emma was crying too. I sat across the street watching the entire thing, completely confused, because whatever was happening didn't look romantic. It didn't look criminal. It didn't even look suspicious anymore. It looked heartbreaking. But then the older woman handed Emma something, a small box. Emma opened it and instantly burst into tears. The kind of tears you can't fake, the kind that come from somewhere deep. I thought I'd finally reached the point where things couldn't become more confusing. I was wrong, because later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message preview appeared on the screen, and the sender's name made my heart stop. Because the contact wasn't Daniel, it wasn't Sarah, it wasn't anyone I recognized. The name was one I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years, a name connected to the most painful loss of my entire life. And according to the message, that person wasn't supposed to be gone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the name on Emma's phone. The same name, the same impossible name, a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in almost 20 years. Jacob, my younger brother, the brother who disappeared when I was 23. Before anyone asks, no, he wasn't officially dead, but after nearly 2 decades without contact, he might as well have been. No phone calls, no letters, no social media, nothing. People searched, family searched, I searched. Eventually everyone gave up, including me. The grief was strange because there was never any closure, just an endless question mark hanging over my life. And now his name had appeared on my wife's phone. I wanted to wake Emma up immediately, demand answers. Instead, I lay there staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself there had to be another Jacob, another explanation, another coincidence. But deep down I already knew it wasn't. The next morning Emma seemed exhausted. She barely touched breakfast. Her eyes looked swollen, like she'd been crying recently. I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to before. How tired she always seemed. How much effort it apparently took to maintain whatever secret she was carrying. For the first time, a tiny crack appeared in my certainty. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to make me wonder. A few days later, something happened that completely shifted the story. Not enough to explain it, but enough to complicate it. I received a call at work. The debt collector who had pursued me for years. The same company connected to the debt that had mysteriously vanished. I expected some kind of mistake. Instead, the representative confirmed everything. The balance had been paid in full, months ago. Not recently, months. Which meant Emma hadn't just suddenly decided to clear it. She'd apparently been working on it quietly for a long time, making payments I never noticed, planning it, budgeting for it, keeping it hidden. I hung up the phone feeling strangely hollow, because that wasn't the behavior of someone trying to hurt me. It was the behavior of someone trying to help me. Yet everything else still looked suspicious. The secrecy, the lies, the phone calls, the missing money, the mysterious people, none of it fit together. Then came Daniel, the man from the phone records, the man I'd practically convinced myself was having an affair with my wife. I finally met him. Accidentally. Or at least I thought it was accidental. I was leaving a grocery store when someone called my name. I turned around. A well-dressed man in his 50s was standing beside a truck, smiling. The exact same man from the profile picture. Daniel, Immediately, my pulse skyrocketed. I tried not to show it. He walked over, extended his hand, and said something that completely caught me off guard. Michael, it's really good to finally meet you. Finally meet me? Not nice to meet me. Finally meet me. As if he'd known about me for a long time. As if he'd been expecting this moment. I shook his hand, trying to stay calm. He looked genuinely happy. Not nervous. Not guilty. Then his expression shifted, almost like he'd realized he'd made a mistake. You know what? He said quickly. Forget I said that. Forget I said that. Sure, ate it. Then he climbed into his truck and left. Just like that. Leaving me standing there with even more questions. That evening I confronted Emma again. Not angrily. Honestly, by then I was exhausted. I simply told her I'd met Daniel. The color drained from her face instantly. For several seconds, she didn't say anything. Then she sat down and started crying. Not dramatic crying. Not manipulative crying. The kind of crying that comes from being overwhelmed. I never wanted this to happen, she whispered. Then tell me what's happening. She looked up at me. For one brief moment, I thought she was finally going to tell me everything. Instead she said, just a little longer. A little longer. The phrase nearly broke me, because I'd been hearing versions of it for months. Waiter, not yet. Trust me, just a little longer. Then she said something that stuck with me, something I couldn't stop thinking about afterward. She looked directly into my eyes and whispered, if you knew how many people are helping with this, you'd understand why it's been so hard to keep secret. Hurl. Not one person, not Daniel, not a hidden relationship, an entire group, an entire network. Helping with what? I still had no idea, but 3 days later I finally learned who Sarah Whitmore was. And that revelation changed everything I thought I knew. Because Sarah wasn't Emma's rival. She wasn't an affair partner. She wasn't even connected to Daniel. Sarah was connected to me. And when I discovered how I sat in my car and cried for the first time in years, a lot of people guessed correctly after my last update. Others guessed completely wrong. Honestly, I don't blame either group. At this point, I was so confused that even I couldn't tell what was real anymore. So here's what happened. I found out who Sarah Whitmore was, or more accurately, who she had been. The discovery came through pure chance. One of the addresses from Emma's file kept bothering me. I finally drove there during my lunch break. The address led to a small historical society building, the kind of place most people would drive past without noticing. Inside were old records, newspapers, photographs, local archives. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I simply asked whether anyone knew a Sarah Whitmore. The elderly volunteer behind the desk looked surprised. Then she smiled. Sarah? You mean Sarah Lawson. Whitmore was her married name. I stared at her blankly. The name meant nothing to me. Then she asked a question, a single question, and suddenly everything changed. Are you related to Thomas? Thomas, my grandfather, the man who practically raised me, the man who died when I was 16, the man I still miss every single day. I felt the air leave my lungs. The volunteer disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a photograph, an old photograph, black and white, worn with age. She handed it to me, and there she was, standing beside my grandfather, smiling. I immediately recognized her face, not because I'd ever met her, because she looked exactly like someone else. My grandfather. Same eyes, same smile, same posture. Family? Somehow, impossibly, family. The volunteer explained that Sarah had been Thomas's younger sister, my great-aunt, a woman who had moved away decades earlier, a woman our family eventually lost contact with, a woman I had never even heard mentioned growing up. I sat there listening as pieces started falling into place, not all of them, but enough to shake me, because suddenly Emma's investigation looked different. The records, the searches, the phone calls, the addresses. She hadn't been investigating a rival. She'd been searching for someone connected to my family, someone connected to me. I left the building with a copy of the photograph, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than suspicion. Curiosity. Confusion. All mixed together. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. Then things got strange again. Because of course they did. That Friday I came home early. Emma wasn't there. Nothing unusual, but sitting on the dining room table was a large binder, one she'd apparently forgotten to put away. I opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, Alens, audits, stadios, contact lists, dozens of names, maybe hundreds, some crossed out, some highlighted, some marked with check marks. And scattered throughout the pages was a phrase that appeared again and again. Project Lighthouse. Project Lighthouse. No explanation, no description, just those 2 words, repeated everywhere. Then I found another page. This one hit me harder. It was a list of names, old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, college roommates, former co-workers, military buddies, neighbors from childhood, even my first little league coach. Next to many of the names were notes. Contacted, conferred, attending. Attending what? I didn't know. But somehow Emma had found people I hadn't seen in decades. People I'd completely lost touch with. And she'd done it without me knowing. That night I couldn't stop staring at the binder after I put it back. My wife wasn't having an affair. At least I no longer believe that. But she was definitely building something. Something enormous. Something involving dozens of people. Possibly hundreds. And apparently it had been going on for years. Yes, the next clue arrived from an unexpected source. Daniel. This time he called me directly. Not by accident. Intentionally. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Most of it made no sense. Except for one sentence. One sentence I hadn't forgotten. He said, "You have no idea how much she loves you." Then he immediately apologized, as if he'd revealed too much, and ended the call. No explanation, no context, nothing, just a sentence that left me sitting in silence. Because nobody talks like that about an affair. Nobody spends years paying off debts, searching family records, contacting old friends, and organizing secret projects because they're betraying someone. For the first time, I started wondering whether I'd been wrong all along. But if I was wrong, then why was Emma still hiding everything? And why did she look absolutely terrified when I told her that Daniel had called me? Because whatever project Lighthouse was, it was entering its final stage. And according to a conversation I accidentally overheard the next day, the date had already been set. The date had been set. That was the sentence that kept replaying in my head. I hadn't meant to overhear the conversation. Emma was in the backyard talking on her phone while I was in the garage. The wind carried just enough of her words for me to catch fragments. Everyone confirmed the date is locked, he can't find out before then, we've come too far. Then silence. The call ended, and once again I was left standing in the middle of a mystery that seemed to revolve entirely around me. Only now, for the first time, I wasn't sure I was the victim. Over the following week, things became increasingly surreal. People started acting strangely around me. Not strangers, people I knew. People who had no reason to be involved. An old coworker randomly called to check in. A former neighbor sent me a message out of nowhere. Even my cousin, who hadn't spoken to me in nearly 5 years, suddenly wanted to catch up. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I stopped believing in coincidence. Someone was talking to these people. Someone was reconnecting them. And I was beginning to suspect that someone was Emma. The strongest confirmation came from my college roommate, Brian. We hadn't spoken in almost 12 years. One evening he called unexpectedly. We spent nearly an hour talking, laughing about stupid things we'd done in our 20s, remembering old stories. For the first time in months, I genuinely felt happy. Then right before hanging up, Brian said something that froze me. "You know, your wife is incredible." Silence. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" There was a long pause, the kind people make when they realize they've said something they shouldn't have. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Nothing. Forget it. Forget it." Everyone suddenly wanted me to forget things. Daniel. Ella. Now Brian. I was getting tired of being the only person without answers. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Remember the older woman from the diner? The one Emma had cried with? I finally learned who she was. Her name was Margaret, and she was related to Sarah Whitmore. Not closely, but enough that she'd spent years helping maintain family records. Records connected to my grandfather's side of the family. The side Emma had apparently been investigating. At this point, I no longer believed Emma was hiding another relationship. The evidence simply didn't fit. But what she was hiding seemed almost bigger, and somehow more emotional. Then came the discovery that changed my understanding of everything. I found a folder labeled with a name I knew immediately. My best friend. The friend I lost 15 years ago. Not because of an argument, not because of distance, because he died. A drunk driver crossed the center line. One phone call changed everything. Anyone who's lost someone that way understands what I mean. There are people who leave an empty space that never quite fills. Ethan was that person for me. I opened the folder. Inside were documents related to a charity, fundraising plans, volunteer records, event permits, donation reports, hundreds of pages, and at the top of nearly every document was the same title, the Ethan Carter Memorial Foundation. I stared at the words for a long time, because I'd never heard of it, not once, not ever. Yet apparently it had existed for years. Yes, and somehow Emma was deeply involved. The deeper I looked, the more emotional it became. scholarships, community programs, support for families affected by drunk driving. Everything connected back to Ethan, to his memory, to the life he never got to live. I suddenly remembered something Daniel had once said. "You have no idea how much she loves you." For the first time, I started to understand. Maybe Project Lighthouse wasn't one thing. Maybe it was dozens of things. Dozens of acts of kindness. Dozens of unfinished pieces, all connected somehow. But connected to what? I still didn't know. Then the biggest revelation of all arrived. Not from Emma. Not from Daniel. Not from one of the mysterious phone calls. It came from a letter. A handwritten letter. Delivered to my mailbox. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single page. One page that left me unable to breathe. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message wasn't. Because the letter began with 6 words I never thought I'd read again. "Hi Michael, it's your brother Jacob." And by the time I reached the end of the page, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Because according to the letter, Jacob hadn't disappeared. He'd been looking for me, and someone had finally found him. I must have read Jacob's letter 20 times, then 30, then maybe 50. I honestly don't know. Every time I reached the end, I started over, looking for signs that it was a mistake, a cruel joke, a spell, anything. But the details were too specific, too personal, too impossible for a stranger to know. The letter mentioned things only Jacob and I shared. The treehouse behind our grandparents' house. The fishing trip where we got lost for 6 hours. The broken baseball glove he borrowed and never returned. Tiny memories nobody else would remember. Nobody. I sat alone in my car for nearly an hour after reading it. Crying. Not dramatic movie crying. Just years of grief leaking out all at once. Because when someone disappears, you never really stop wondering. You imagine 1,000 endings. Most of them bad. Eventually, you teach yourself not to think about it. Not because it hurts less. Because it's the only way to survive. And now suddenly there was a letter. Who? Oh, why? Questions. So many questions. The biggest one being, how did Emma know? That night I finally confronted her. Not angrily, not accusingly. I simply placed the letter on the kitchen table. The moment she saw it, she froze. Absolutely froze. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, she didn't deny anything. She sat down, covered her face, and cried. I sat across from her, waiting. Eventually, she looked up. "I wanted you to hear it from him." That's all she said. I remember staring at her, not understanding. Hear what? More tears, more silence. Then, that he never stopped looking for you. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Because for 20 years, I'd believed the opposite. That he'd left. That he'd chosen not to come back. That maybe he simply didn't care enough. Emma explained only a little. Not everything. Just enough. Years earlier, she'd learned fragments of information while researching my family history. One lead became another, then another. Most went nowhere. Some ended in dead ends. But she never completely gave up. Not because she expected success, because she knew how much losing Jacob had hurt me. So she kept searching, quietly, for years. Yes, I couldn't even process it. The woman I thought was betraying me had apparently spent part of her life trying to reunite me with my brother. And somehow that wasn't even the biggest secret. Because she still refused to explain Project Lighthouse. She still refused to explain Daniel. She still refused to explain the storage units, the money, the endless meetings, or the dozens of people involved. The mystery remained, only now the pieces looked different. Then something happened that changed my relationship with Emma completely. I stopped investigating. For the first time in months, I simply stopped. No checking phone records, no following her, no searching documents, nothing. Partly because I was exhausted, partly because I felt ashamed. The more I learned, the worse I felt about my assumptions. The secret phone calls, many had been with people helping locate Jacob. The hidden conversations, people connected to my past. The missing money? Apparently, not what I thought at all. And every revelation made me feel smaller, meaner, less deserving. A week later, I came home to find Emma sitting alone in the living room, holding an old photograph, one of Ethan and me. She looked emotionally drained, the way she'd looked for months, maybe years. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she whispered, "I hope it's enough." The phrase haunted me. Enough for what? Enough to make up for something? Enough to heal something? Enough to justify years of secrecy? I didn't know. Then she looked at me and asked a question I'll never forget. If you could have one dream from childhood come true, what would it be? I laughed, not because it was funny, because the answer was obvious. It had always been obvious. Since I was 9 years old, since before life became complicated. I told her, and the moment I said, she started crying again. Not quietly, not subtly, completely, as if she'd just heard the ending of a story she'd been carrying for years. I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't suspicious. I was worried, because whatever she'd been building, whatever project Lighthouse really was, it was clearly much bigger than I understood. And the next day I finally learned why. Because Daniel showed up at my front door, and what he brought with him explained where every missing dollar had gone. By the time Daniel knocked on my front door, I was no longer afraid he was having an affair with my wife, at least not consciously. But seeing him standing there still made my stomach tighten, because for months this man had been at the center of every suspicion, every late night call, every hidden meeting, every mystery, and now he was standing on my porch holding a thick folder. Emma wasn't home, just me and him. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he smiled gently, not the confident smile I'd imagined 100 times. A tired smile, the smile of someone carrying a secret for too long. I think it's finally time, he said. My heart immediately started racing. Time for what? He looked at the folder, then back at me. To understand. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd accused Emma, the same table where I'd stared at Jacob's letter, the same table where I'd spent months imagining the worst. Daniel opened the folder, and my entire world shifted. Inside were years of records, not months. Yes, 5 years, according to the earliest documents. 5 years of planning, 5 years of phone calls, 5 years of fundraising, 5 years of searching, 5 years of work, all organized under one name, Project Lighthouse. Finally, an explanation. Daniel began showing me page after page, volunteer lists, donor records, construction permits, property documents, travel arrangements, guest confirmations, names of people I'd known throughout my life, hundreds of names, literally hundreds. The deeper I looked, the more unbelievable it became. Old classmates, childhood friends, former teachers, neighbors, co-workers, relatives, even people I hadn't seen since elementary school. Emma had somehow found them, one by one, over years, not weeks, not months. Yes, then Daniel showed me the financial records, and suddenly the missing money made sense. Every withdrawal, every unexplained expense, every mysterious payment. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been invested, carefully, patiently, into something Emma believed would matter more than anything else she'd ever done. I remember looking up at Daniel, still confused, still missing the biggest piece. What? I asked. Why would she do all this? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folder and handed me a photograph. The second I saw it, my throat closed. It was me, 9 years old, standing in front of a lighthouse, a real lighthouse. One we'd visited during a family vacation. The happiest trip of my childhood. The trip where I'd announced to everyone that someday I wanted to own a lighthouse. Not live near one, not visit one, own one. A ridiculous childhood dream. The kind people laugh about. The kind everyone forgets. Everyone except Emma. Daniel pointed to a document, a property record, then another, and suddenly I understood. Not completely, but enough. My hands started shaking. Because Project Lighthouse wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a charity. It wasn't a code name. It was an actual lighthouse. A real one. An abandoned lighthouse property that had spent years falling apart. A property Emma had somehow become involved with restoring. My mind couldn't process it. It sounded insane. Impossible. But Daniel wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the lighthouse itself wasn't the surprise. It was only the location, the stage, the setting, the thing everything else had been built around. Then he showed me the guest list, and I completely broke. Page after page of names. People I'd loved, people I'd lost, people I'd thought were gone forever. Friends from childhood, friends from college, former mentors, family members, people from every chapter of my life, including Jacob, my brother. Jacob's name was there, confirmed, attending. I couldn't breathe. I genuinely couldn't breathe, because suddenly I understood why Emma had been making secret phone calls, why she'd been traveling, why she'd been crying, why she'd been exhausted. She wasn't managing one surprise. She was coordinating hundreds of moving pieces, a project so complicated it took years, and somehow she had done it mostly alone. Then Daniel quietly revealed the final piece. The piece connected to Ethan, the reason Emma always became emotional whenever his name came up, the reason she helped build the memorial foundation, the reason she never stopped working on it. Project Lighthouse wasn't just about reconnecting me with people. It was about honoring people who couldn't be there, especially Ethan. And when Daniel explained what would happen at the lighthouse, I started crying before he even finished the sentence. Because for the first time, I finally understood what Emma had been trying to give me. And the event was only 3 days away. 3 days later, Emma told me we were going on a trip. That was it. No details. No explanation. Just a small smile and the words, "Trust me." After everything that had happened, I finally did. The drive lasted almost 4 hours. Neither of us talked much. She seemed nervous. Not suspicious nervous. Terrified nervous. Like someone standing moments away from finding out whether years of work had been worth it. I remember reaching over and taking her hand. For months I'd interpreted every strange behavior as evidence of betrayal. Now I could feel how hard she'd been carrying all of this alone. By the time we reached the coast, the sun was beginning to set. And then I saw it. The lighthouse. Standing against the ocean. Beautiful. Restored. Alive. For a moment I forgot how to speak. Because I recognized it immediately from the photographs Daniel had shown me. Project Lighthouse. The thing Emma had spent years building. The thing that had consumed so much of her time, money, energy, and heart. The thing I had mistaken for an affair. Emma parked the car. Neither of us moved. Then she looked at me, tears already forming. "You ready?" I nodded. Honestly, I wasn't. Nothing could have prepared me. We walked toward the entrance. The door opened, and my entire world stopped. People everywhere. Hundreds of people. Not strangers. My people. My life. My history. My story. Every chapter of it standing together in one place. Childhood friends. Former neighbors. Teachers. Co-workers. College roommates. Relatives. Mentors. People I hadn't seen in 10, 15, 20 years. The room erupted into applause. I don't remember falling to my knees, but apparently I did, because the next thing I remember is crying. Openly, uncontrollably. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than words. One by one they came toward me. Stories, memories, laughter, tears. It felt impossible, like I'd somehow stepped into another life. Then the crowd parted, and I saw him. Jacob, my brother, older, gray in places, different, and exactly the same. For several seconds neither of us moved. 20 years vanished in a single moment. Then we ran toward each other. I've replayed that hug 1,000 times since. No movie scene could ever capture it. No words can fully explain it. Two brothers who thought they had lost each other forever, finding each other again. I don't know how long we stood there. I only know neither of us wanted to let go. Eventually Jacob told me his story. The mistakes, the fear, the reasons he disappeared, the years he spent trying to rebuild his life, the failed attempts to find family, the dead ends, the regrets, and then the woman who refused to give up searching. My wife, the woman I had accused in my own mind for months, the woman who never stopped looking. But there was one final surprise, the last thing Emma had kept hidden. As evening fell, everyone gathered outside. The lighthouse illuminated the coastline, soft golden light cutting through the darkness. Daniel stepped forward and handed me a plaque. At the top were 3 words, the Ethan Carter Lighthouse Foundation. I couldn't speak. Emma finally explained. The lighthouse would operate as a non-profit retreat and scholarship center, a place for families dealing with loss, a place for grief support programs, a place funded in part by the charity she'd quietly built in Ethan's memory, a place dedicated to helping people find hope when life becomes dark, a lighthouse, in every sense of the word. Then she pointed toward a wall inside, a wall I hadn't noticed before, covered with photographs, people we'd loved, people we'd lost, people who shaped our lives. At the center was Ethan, smiling exactly as I remembered him. Not forgotten, not gone, remembered, honored, part of something bigger. That was the moment I finally understood. The secret phone calls, the disappearing money, the hidden conversations, the unexplained trips, the strange behavior, the mysterious men, the years of secrecy. Every single clue pointed to love, not betrayal. Oh, the overwhelming, exhausting, impossible kind of love that quietly changes lives. Later that night, after everyone left and the ocean was calm, I asked Emma one question. Why did you do all this? She leaned her head against my shoulder and gave the simplest answer imaginable. Because you spend your whole life making everyone else's dreams come true. She smiled through tears. I wanted to give one back. I spent months believing my wife was cheating. The truth was far worse. She was secretly changing my life, and I will spend the rest of mine trying to deserve her. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.